guess. And I think, I don't know if that's what we are known for, but that's what I want to be known for, I guess, in the studio.
Dr. Goodman.
Hey, sorry, I was busy trying to write all that down. I'm stealing all of that. Um, yeah, so I think for me, I'm really at a point. I've been in this is my fifth year in a row being in the first year of a contract coming up. So I have been kind of hopping from place to place. And so I think for me, a stamp is going to be mostly theoretical at this point. But I think in my teaching, the thing that I really try to instill as sort of a musical and life habit is kind of asking questions about what you're intending to do. So I think one of the easiest ways to kind of get to the important thing in what we're doing, either as a musician or as a tuba player or euphonium player, is to kind of ask, what do I want the end goal to be? What do I want the audience to take away from this? And that gets you to the kind of lofty goals of, I want them to feel moved, or I want them to feel, sort of excited or joyful. You can get to these kind of like emotional takeaways, but it also gets you to, I want them to think that person really makes a beautiful sound, or that person really plays, supportively, and I'm not sound wars, really sensitive musician. So it's kind of asking yourself before you get to any of the nitty gritty work, what's the end goal? What do you want this to look like when you get done? And then kind of work backwards from there, so you don't spend a lot of time putting a lot of effort into things and then finding, oh, this isn't exactly what I need to do, and I've got to kind of change gears right at the end.
Dr. Clarkson.
So similar to Dr. Wass, I have a policy in my studio that we call it the no a-hole policy, but it's just like I say that, and I say it really up front to all of my prospective students too, that kind of my biggest priority is cultivating a culture in the studio that's going to be supportive and hardworking. And not the only situations that I find myself in, but a lot of the time when I decline a student admittance, it's because I think that their attitude is really crummy. So that's one big thing for me. I'm not sure how much of a stamp that is, so much as just like a verbal policy that the whole studio buys into. I hope my stamp is that my students start to really understand how to harness the time they have available to them by being really efficient practicers. Like, we actually spend a ton of time in lessons talking about practice strategy, and I use the kind of idea of tools in your toolbox and saying, like, what's the right tool for the job, and how do we decide what the right tool is? How can you adapt this tool for the situation at hand? And so a lot of what I do in lessons is really trying to make sure that they don't need me when they leave, so that they can graduate and continue to get better without someone like telling them how to do that. But you'll have to ask my students how that's going. So maybe I'll ask them when school starts again. Great question, though.
Dr. Dickinson.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what's already been said, quite frankly. I think everybody wants their students to be professionally successful. So everybody's doing the nuts and bolts. Everybody's making sure that, yes, you better know your scales. It's like knowing your alphabet. You got to be able to make your way around on the instrument, and it'd be nice if you play with some dynamics sometime. But learning how to do that. Ultimately, if I had to define like one stamp that I really drive towards with my students, it's not so much about the nuts and bolts. They're going to do that. They're going to run into that. We're going to make sure that's there. But their ultimate approach to music is something that I really want to make sure is locked down. Trying to find a positive atmosphere in the studio and a positive atmosphere for them and their relationship with music very specifically. So we try to keep things as growth oriented as we can, which means they got to be forgiving. When we're leaning into trial and error, that's a good thing. That's a growth opportunity instead of just mistakes in the practice room where you put a hole in the wall. We push the hard work, we push the time in the practice room, but with that core, that kernel of self-forgiving and goal-oriented mindsets. I want all my students to find their voice in music. I want them to be able to say what they want to say on the instrument and be able to do it as easily as possible, and in a relaxed way, in a very natural way. And once they've found their voice, a lot of times they tend to find their joy in music too, and that's what's going to build that long-term, sustainable kind of career that I would want for them. And quite frankly, if it's not there, that's okay too. Maybe their joy is in something else, but that's part of my job as the studio teacher in their first year or two, If their joy isn't in music, I want them to be successful, no matter where that ends up being for them. So that's kind of the biggest things I shoot for with the studio in general.
Dr. Benavidez.
Yeah, so, not to be repetitive, so many wonderful ideas from this panel, and I can't say that I don't do the same. I mean, one of our mottos here is, we play well with others, teach well to others, do well for others, is something that I try to instill in all of my students, understanding that you're not necessarily just an individual working on your own craft or on your own instrument. Obviously, the musical community is a small one, but it's one that thrives on everyone working together. What's already been said, someone else's success is not necessarily your failure, right? I just think that having a group mentality and pursuing a group success that coalesces into something that is greater than self is a really defining aspect that I try to instill in my students and in my studio. Another idea is maintaining curiosity. Not only about your physical development or your mental development and musical development, but maintaining curiosity and being open mind to all resources. What's already been said, finding your own voice and your own path, I think are crucial elements for all students. I think every teacher here would say that we're not interested in making clones of ourselves or in making clones of students. This conversation reminds me of that famous Victor Wooten quote, where he says, the world doesn't need another great bass player, the world needs good people. And I think that overall large mentality is something that can sometimes be missed when we pursue specific individual goals, and I try to avoid that as much as possible.
Well said. I think this is actually a perfect segue into our first audience question. One of our viewers wants to know when you feel it's appropriate to kind of switch between being their tuba or euphonium or tuba and euphonium teacher to being more of a mentor, can be professional or personal. Could we start with Dr. Goodman?
Sure. I've definitely found that the times where you kind of need to put the tuba or the euphonium to the side and do some sort of life-related stuff usually presents itself pretty well. I think, not to be a cliche, but in these troubled times that we've been having, one of the things I noticed with my students was that since so many of the academic classes were online, a lot of them were either asynchronous or in some way were not as scheduled as they used to be. So it used to be that you could show up at school and then you go from one class to another. You have a break and you talk to people. And some of the students that I found really struggled during that were the ones that I kind of describe as the ones that would be talking to someone and be like, oh, that's due today, and then run off to the library. Because there's no way for that to, that sort of little push to happen, that kind of peer thing to happen. And a lot of them were suddenly, all day would be this unstructured time. And I certainly could empathize that that's really hard for me to get a lot done when I have nothing to break up my day. And so I had a couple of students that, some of my students were doing fine in all of this and were well organized and self-driven, and some of them were starting to get further and further behind all the time. And so I had a few lessons where we kind of talked about how to build a schedule or how to kind of figure out how to get stuff done when you're not, when no one's making you. And I think usually for me, it takes the form of you start trying to do the tuba stuff and sometimes it just isn't happening. You have to kind of figure out what's going on. And other times it's clear you can't even start with that. But, I think that for me, there's almost always something that tells you, okay, again, trying to worry about the scales, trying to worry about the excerpts, whatever we're doing isn't the thing we need to be doing right now. And just trying to be open and attentive to that.
Dr. Benavidez?
Yeah, I think that, to preface your question a little bit, I think that the two don't necessarily need to be mutually exclusive. I find that oftentimes the lessons and the time that I have with students, we're doing mentorship along with working on musical aspects. And, I've even found myself on an audition day. The first day I might meet someone, they have questions that require a particular aspect of mentoring. And I think being a good teacher is being aware of the many facets of stewardship that occur beyond the scales and the notes. And I know everybody here has had that experience, but it's a hard thing to kind of define because it's not like there's a right or wrong time to approach mentorship. I think it's always in the room, and it can be something that benefits the music and that builds the mutual trust between the student and the teacher that ultimately can serve for the student to take more musical risks and chances. So I found that as long as I'm attentive to it, the opportunity can be there to be a mentor as well as develop the music.
Dr. Dickinson?
Yeah, in agreement very much with you, Dr. Benavidez. As far as I don't think they are mutually exclusive all the time. And you're right, it is kind of a hard thing to just say, yes, in this specific situation, you're going to want to do blank. Because the fact is, any given day, a student might walk in the door and their life might be in shambles. Yeah, and we don't always know what's going on the other 6 days of the week necessarily. Personally, I'm adjunct at both of these universities, so I'm only on campus a day or two a week. I'm not there all the time with an open office, and so if they're coming in, one of the first things we always do is check in. How's your week? How's school? How are assignments? Great. And you can kind of get a gauge even beyond the words whether they're really feeling fragile or if they're feeling pretty good, or how did that week actually go. When the eyes start darting around when you ask about the practice log, that's one thing. But if they're a little bit pale and eyes, maybe they had an all-nighter the day before. Maybe they worked I had a student that was working closing shifts until 2 or 3 a.m. and had an 8 a.m. lesson. Like, that's just not tenable. So when you find out about stuff like that, it's important to act on it. But there's maybe not a cookie cutter answer for it. I would say that Abraham Maslow had a lot of important things to say about the hierarchy of needs, making sure that the person is taken care of first. You need to make sure that you're not trying to as was already said, trying not to drill scales and arpeggios when someone is not in it. Maybe they need to just breathe. Maybe y'all can talk music. Maybe you can listen to music. Maybe you can reschedule and find another time. You don't necessarily want to try to inject yourself super deeply into all the drama that can go on in student life, but you're there to be kind of a parental figure. In a lot of ways, you become their parental figure in some aspects. So try to give perspective, try to be supportive, try to make sure that you're taking care of the student. And if it continues being a problem, you need to be very familiar with whatever university resources are available so that you can make sure those students are well taken care of. So,
Dr. Wass?
Yeah, I think that's that final point there especially is a really good one. The first things you got to do, here's number one, go to Costco or whatever you need to do, have those on hand. One of the things I realized very early in my career, I've been doing this 20 years now, post-adolescent dudes, especially from West Texas, are not people who are super comfortable talking about their feelings. And so when they all of a sudden are away from mom and dad, away from their friends and everything, and then once a week they get to come in and meet with somebody that they trust behind a soundproof door, you get a lot of waterworks. It's quite often, almost every student I've had here at some point has walked through the door is closed, and immediately they burst into tears. And that's, and so being prepared for that, but then also understanding where the limits are. That, we shouldn't be practicing psychology without a license, which is what professors are often accused of doing. And so you have to know the limitations. And sometimes it's the limitations with your individual relationship with the student hey, you just got to let that student know, hey, that's not something I'm comfortable talking with you about. Or I don't feel like I'm equipped to have this conversation with you. But right from the beginning, you have to let them know that you're open to whatever it is going to be. You have to decide, how open do you want to be with your students? How many of these conversations do you want to have? What sort of limitations are there? But let them know right away that you care. Asking those questions about, hey, how are your classes going? Hey, you know what? Your academics are important to me. So you let them know. How you're feeling is important to me, because then if they do need to come in and not play their scales for you, but instead say, look, instead of playing my scales, Dr. Wass, I really need to talk to you about something. And I think I usually manage to get students to the place where they're comfortable enough where they can initiate the conversation. But everything that's been said so far, really paying attention and just letting them know, look, you can come to me with stuff. And then, hey, if I can't help you, we actually have a folder that we all keep on our desk here that's called Students in Crisis. And I've used it more in the last 18 months than in the previous 19 years, I think. But yeah, I think to me, that's sort of at the root of it. Let them know that they can talk to you, and then also know where the limits need to be.
Dr. Clarkson.
Yeah, I think everyone kind of touched on the same things. I definitely don't think of those as being like switching approaches or switching goals. I think for me, it's always teaching a whole person in front of me and not just what they're doing on the instrument. So I consider that to be a way that kind of shows the student that I don't just care about you as a person who operates an instrument. Like, I care about you as an individual and as a person and with the struggles that you're going through. And I think a huge part of that is cultivating an environment where the student feels like they can talk to you and share those things. And a big part of that is also me feeling comfortable sharing things with them. I mean, not like ultra personal things, but sometimes I'll say like, oh, I'm just kind of having a crummy day, or like letting them know like, oh, I practiced this morning and it did not sound good. Letting them know that I'm human too. And I think that kind of lets there be this reciprocal relationship where they know that it's safe to be a human in this space and not just like a perfectionist robot. But I definitely agree with Dr. Wass that this past year has really challenged me in particular in terms of finding my own boundaries for what I feel like I can and cannot help with. And this past year has definitely helped me to also start to lean a lot more heavily on the resources that we have on campus and letting students know that it's okay to seek professional advice and help for things that are happening in their lives. In Oklahoma, I'm not sure that that's necessarily something that is always encouraged for high school students. And so I talk to my students about my therapist, and I talk to them about how helpful that's been for me. And I think even then having them hear another adult talk about like how helpful just talking to someone else can be who's trained in those things also, again, just makes it a safe space to like ask for help, ask where they can go, share. And yeah, just again trying to make sure that they know that I care about them fully and not just as an operational instrumentalist.
Yeah, wonderful. So I guess my last question for this part of the panel is just, why did you individually decide to pursue the higher education path as a professor? And along those lines, for anyone listening, is there any advice that you could give to someone in, just helping them to come to terms with the question, if the teaching path is for you individually, like how you can really determine that, right? Like based on your own skill set or based on what your interests are and just how you kind of, revolve around that idea and personalize it a little bit. So let's start with Dr. Benavidez.
I thought you might pick me first. Yeah, so I went to school, as I said before, without a lot of foundation before I started college. I knew that at that time the best instrumentalists were pursuing performance degrees, and I saw that as the goal to achieve. And I proceeded through 3 degrees. I went to the University of Michigan for 2 graduate degrees, master's and doctorate, and all of my degrees are in performance. So you could make the case that I'm not particularly well trained to be a teacher. But what I did during that time was I started to teach privately, initially as a way to make some extra money, quite honestly. In undergraduate, I was teaching middle school lessons, high school lessons. In my graduate studies, I was teaching adults and more high school and middle school students, as well as a few college students. And what I realized is that my desire to perform music never particularly waned, but I started to develop and foster this additional part of my musical identity, which was interacting with others in really close circumstances, seeing people make gains in their own development or in their own path because I could be there to help them, to offer information or a model or what have you. And I felt I felt like there was a particular sustainability of the happiness from those experiences that I didn't always have from the performance side. And, I think that if you're a student who's thinking about whether they want to be a performer or a teacher, my mentors always told me, look, if you're gonna be a performer and a really successful performer, people are gonna come to you for lessons. That's the way our business works. And if you're gonna be a really successful teacher, you're gonna want to be a great performer, because that is, in my opinion, the primary well of information that you're going to use for your students. So, I think that at some point along my path, I decided, well, I want to be good at both, and I want to see where this takes me. And I was really, really fortunate enough to have some job prospects after my doctorate that led me into a sustainable career where I love what I do. I know everyone on this panel would agree. The investment in others is just something that makes me feel bigger than myself. And I think that sometimes as tuba and euphonium players, we play the concert and we go out to the car after, and I know I would think, well, I wonder if anyone noticed me. I wonder if anyone recalls the tuba part to the symphony I just played. But I know that when I teach someone and when they make a breakthrough, I know that not only is that going to support further development in their own path, but that it was something that they valued. And so I ultimately felt like my time was used in a really productive way. And for me personally, that's a really great source of happiness and meaning and purpose. So ultimately, that's what led me further down this path, and obviously, like my colleagues here, I'm ecstatic about it. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but you came to me first, so that's what you get.
I think that absolutely answers the question. So now let's go with Dr. Goodman, because you're right below Dr. Benavidez on my screen.
Yeah, so I think from when I decided to pursue music professionally, I kind of had the attitude that I didn't really care what I ended up doing in particular, as long as it had to do with music, and it would be great if tuba were involved as well. And so in a lot of my degrees, I was doing performance stuff. I started as a music ed major and realized that perhaps school teaching was not for me. But I pursued lots of performance stuff, lots of just kind of anything in music that was available. And once I got to my master's degree, I was really taking a lot of auditions. And I really fell into, at that time, there were a ton of military band auditions. And I started learning that repertoire and feeling like I was pretty confident in knowing what I was doing there. And it ended up where I got to an audition and was offered a position in one of the military bands. And then after about a 6-month process of trying to go through the enlistment thing, I discovered that I had a very minor hearing loss, and at that time, they weren't giving waivers for stuff like that. So I felt like I had kind of like gotten this dream job, and then it wasn't going to happen. And so from then I went back sort of reluctantly to graduate school and continued to apply for everything, which I've been doing the whole time, and just found that I started doing well in teaching stuff. And I think getting that interview, I think for me was about having done so much performing and having that on my resume is sort of a serious endorsement. And then, I got my first adjunct teaching job and found that I really liked it. And then I managed to get a full-time teaching job and found that I liked that even more. 5 days a week was better than 2. And so it's something that I don't think I ever really had like a beat on going into it. But I think I kind of accidentally prepared myself for it pretty well. And as Dr. Benavidez said, it is incredibly fulfilling. I found that even when I was teaching adjunct and I was making sort of like, $40 a semester or something, I would get done at the end of the day and I'd just be really excited about what I had done. And I found that really kind of sustains things. It makes it easy to show up at work.
Oh, that's great. Dr. Dickinson, let's go with you.
$40, man, sign me up. I kid. I love you, Kennesaw State and Rhinehart. Please don't fire me. So this career path for me, I actually I was choosing between Clemson University for material sciences and Furman University to do their pre-med track. And I chose Furman because it was with the scholarship stuff worked out really well there, and spent about 2 weeks, and then to the thrilling my parents, decided that I was going to do music education. I had always loved band, and I loved euphonium and playing tuba. but something about the atmosphere there, the band environment set up by Les Hicken and Jay Bocook was just electric. I loved my lessons. It was a perfect storm. I wanted to pursue it. I stayed music education all the way through my undergraduate, but I started doing competitions kind of along and was having some success. So when we got to my senior year, I was student teaching and I loved it. I had opportunities to work with bands, and I could see myself going either way. So I took some master's auditions just to see what avenues might be open. And I prepared all the audition stuff and that resume, and then I prepared my potential band director resume, and things worked out. I got offered an assistantship at Georgia State with Adam and pursued that. Two years later, same thing. Prepared one resume and prepared the other auditions, and it worked out with Paul Evers down in Florida State there. And so pursued that, and if just I kept along the path. I did find my love. I always enjoyed teaching. I loved watching that spark ignite in a student. I loved watching them get a new concept or conquer a challenge that they thought was insurmountable, maybe even just a week before. It was a pretty special thing. And I love that feeling of being able to make a difference and engaging. So yeah, fulfilling is exactly the right word. How to know if it's for you? I mean, honestly, Charlie, you mentioned, you knew pretty quickly. You didn't feel as comfortable with the large group band director public school idea. Like, that's the kind of thing that even, some people go in and it's a spark there or it's not. So put yourself in those situations when you're in your undergraduate. Get out there before your student teaching, maybe. My students at the end of their freshman year, going into the sophomore years, I'm trying to connect them with some local middle schools here around the Atlanta area just to get them out there. Like, do you really want to do this? What does it really mean? The only experience they know so far is what they've been through. So I want to make sure that you give yourself that opportunity to see what else is out there, to kind of help yourself make that decision. And as far as choosing to do a professor path, I love teaching, I love playing, and it worked out very, very fortunately for me. I only ever took a couple of auditions in the third year of my doctorate because I was needing a job and looking ahead at the future, and so I started sending in tapes and took a couple of the Air Force auditions that were open then. But this is what worked out, and I'm thrilled. So.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting because I know, like, with some of my students, some of them say, maybe I'm better at following orders, or maybe I'm better at communicating, or vice versa. And so a lot of times maybe they're not as adventurous, in trying to see if they would be good at communicating and teaching. But it's until you try it, right, that you can actually gauge for yourself if it's for you or not.
Exactly.
For Clarkson.
For me, it was instilled pretty early on that you are never going to be just a performer or just a teacher. And I think part of that was because I had the luxury of growing up around a lot of professional musicians in the military bands, and heard that exactly the same thing from them. Like, if you want to be a teacher, you also have to be good enough at your instrument to teach it. And if you want to be a performer, you're never going to make a full income without also teaching along the way. And so I knew going into undergrad that I wanted to study music ed, because I knew that regardless of what I ended up doing, it was going to make me better at what I found myself kind of falling into. And so I did a music ed degree, and kind of toward the end of that, I think, honestly, I always knew that I wanted to go on and get a master's and possibly a doctorate, like from a pretty early age. And I don't know how depressing or not depressing that is, but I just stayed in school because I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I took a lot of auditions along the way, like a lot of military band auditions, as Charlie was saying. And for me, again, I always knew I wanted to teach. I kind of had pictured the order of those things happening kind of differently. But when I was in grad school at Indiana, taking a lot of auditions, there was one audition where I had to pass MEPS before I was allowed to attend. And I did Whole30 for 90 days and saw a personal trainer 3 times a week and just killed myself. And I literally could not have weighed 1 ounce more at that MEPS session and be allowed to take the audition. And then I didn't even make it past the first round. And that was one of those moments where I was like, do I want to have to never have pizza again? Like, do I want to never be able to have donuts again? And I was like, I started to just kind of reevaluate, like, as much as I want to play in a military band, and that's always what I saw myself doing, especially growing up outside DC, thinking like, oh, well, then I can go live close to my family and all those things. It just kind of realized that was not really what I wanted my life to look like. And so I sort of started to switch focus over to doing something different. And I tell my students all the time that the things that you think you really want for yourself, if they don't work out, usually in retrospect, you can look back on those moments and say like, oh my God, bullet dodged. Well, I feel very much that way for myself about military band playing, because I'm sure I would have really enjoyed it, and I'm sure I would have loved it in a totally different way than what I love about my job now. But I also like really love pizza, and I really love donuts, and like I really love not having to run a lot. And there were so many things about that process that were just like not for me. So yeah, I think it was a roundabout way. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher, but it happened maybe sooner than I was expecting.
That's great. And finally, Dr. Wass.
Yeah, I think too often high school students are making their decision based on very limited knowledge. And you've heard people touching on that like they haven't really performed and they haven't really taught. Okay, maybe you were a drum major, maybe you were a section leader, maybe even you were in like Future Music Educators Club or something like that, where you're going down to the middle school and helping the beginners and stuff. That's not really teaching, where you have the responsibility for what those students are going to be doing on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. Same thing with performing. Okay, you made All-State. That's not the same as preparing for a military band audition, or, you know, as Jenny was just saying, it's beyond the playing. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes into that. So I think trying to get kids to calm down on the decision when they're 17, when they haven't really done anything yet, and say, you know what? It's like everybody here has been saying, you're a musician. In here, you are a musician. And there's a whole lot of ways that can express itself. It can be in teaching, it can be in performance, it can be in improvisation, in composition, it can be in one of the scholastic fields. And I've had students that have ended up in all those things. You know, students who started out maybe in music ed and then switched to performance. And, you know, actually I had somebody like that. Started out music ed, switched to performance. He just finished his PhD in music theory. You know, so you sort of find that path. You start having these experiences in college that are a little bit more intense. We try to give you a really intense performance experience so that you know what it feels like, even on a small scale, to prepare for a big performance or for an audition. And then that helps you make that decision. And, you know, we can have those conversations. Sometimes a student will have kind of that first real breakout performance where they just really, really play great and they put all the work into it. And a lot of times, I've seen this so many times in 20 years, they come into the next lesson and they decide they really want to be an ed major. Because they're like, yeah, I had that great performance. I know I can do it, but I didn't enjoy that process at all. And I mean, that's a really mature decision, right? And for me, I was either going to be a band director or an orchestral tuba player. And so my undergraduate degree is music ed. It's also liberal arts, which has come in really handy, especially I'm at an institution that's trying to go R1 designation now. So, you know, being able to at least communicate with researchers in an intelligent way with that liberal arts background has been helpful. I went straight from undergrad in music ed into a master's in performance, and then after that, I was done with school. And so I taught public school for 4 years, which has been huge in my teaching. It also really helped with this job because this is a music ed school, especially when I was hired here. The entire studio was music ed, but they really wanted to raise their performance level. They wanted somebody who had the music ed background that could understand those students and be able to relate to them, but also let them know, look, just because you're music ed doesn't mean you can't go out and do great things in performance. And so, you know, they were looking for someone with my specific background when they made the hire here. And like I said, when you're teaching fourth grade strings, man, you learn how to teach. And they've never had any other teacher. You can't be like, man, that darn third grade teacher didn't teach me any of this stuff. No, I mean, if they don't know, it's because you didn't teach them. And you get that immediate feedback. But you also get to see that, yeah, you can totally blow chunks all over a lesson. In your head, it was going to be the greatest lesson ever. You know, the lesson plan looked beautiful on the page and everything, and you go in there, and 5 minutes into it, you're just tanking. But you know what? The next day you can go in, they're fourth graders. You go in the next day, you teach the same lesson again, they don't care. And they get it, you know? And so I think I learned a lot about how to be effective as a teacher, but also how to be patient from having that public school experience. So for me, that was huge, having that background and having that experience.
Well said. I love a lot of that. Mostly pizza, but the stuff about Tuba, that's great too. I want to share just a tiny story. I know I'm not the featured guest, but I just finished my first year as an adjunct professor in Texas, and for those around the world, we know Texas All-State is a rather serious thing to young students. Before I started my first year, I got emails from 3 of my 7 students telling me about their all-state achievements. All of them were seniors in college, and then when I asked them about their undergraduate careers, they had nothing to tell me. And now they know that there was stuff to learn those other 3 years to tell me. I asked their permission before sharing that, but they've all made some incredible progress this year introspectively.
Were they still wearing the letter jacket too?
They got me one. It's really cool. We're a squad now. No, I want to transition. This has all been fascinating. I want to go into some sharper, quicker answers. But first, I just want to give us a little ad break to talk a little bit more about education through music. Again, for those who are tuning in now, we've had a ton of people check this out. This is fantastic. I hope to make that we're all getting the message across that this is all for the good of education and for the good of our community as a whole. Education through music. It's a nonprofit that works with schools to give all students equal opportunity in music, to make sure that the costs of keeping instruments up to stuff, and the costs of running trips and the costs of purchasing music don't interfere with the student's ability to participate in music in a way that all of us have been so fortunate to experience. So if you're able and willing to give a donation, there's a link in our link tree in our Instagram bio. They do some incredible work, and so thanks to them for making it possible for more people to see what we see in the musical world. And so I want to get a quick 3 bullet point answer from each of you. Say a young student approaches you and says, I want to be a college professor. What do you tell them to do today to help get them to that place? Please don't say practice. Dr. Goodman, please start us off.
Oh no, I was hoping you were going to call me first. Things to do today. Well, I'm going to start talking. We'll see where it goes. So point number 1, I think I'm not going to say practice, but I think if you want to be a college professor, I think that one key thing is that getting the degrees isn't enough. The degrees help. Oftentimes you need the degrees, but you can't forget during that time to be pursuing professional music really, really seriously. So go out, do performance stuff, do teaching stuff, get experience, both so that you know if you like it and you get better at it, and also so that on your CV you can show the committee that you have done these things. So you need to be really active even as a student, and can't just get A's and everything and then get done and then start looking. I think the second one would be studying with anyone you can, both to improve you as a player and also so you can plagiarize their teaching. Having a lot of different approaches and just sort of having been sort of, I think one of my strengths as a teacher has been that almost none of my initial playing instincts were correct, and so I've done basically every part of playing wrong in basically every way at one point or another, and that really helps when I see someone else making some of the same boneheaded mistakes I used to do. It's like, okay, I tried that, let's not do that anymore. And I think that getting a lot of feedback, both to help you with your own playing stuff, and also so that you get lots of these tools that you can then steal and use on your own students. And then third, I'm going to get incredibly specific. I read a book in my master's degree by Robert Duke, who teaches at University of Texas at Austin, called Intelligent Music Teaching. And that was really an inflection point for me, from going into a lesson and being like, oh my God, what do you tell a person? They do every single thing wrong. How I don't know where to start because I didn't have that education background. And then really being able to feel like I can help them, right? Kind of meet them where they are and just kind of start making incremental progress. So if you guys don't know that book, Intelligent Music Teaching by Robert.
Dr. Clarkson.
Okay, I'm glad I went second because I actually wrote mine down. That's weird. You were talking. Cheating.
5 points deducted.
Oh, cool. That's like, oh, okay. The first thing I said was find a teacher that you like and trust. And I think it's not having a teacher before you start college doesn't mean that you can't still be incredibly successful, but it really does help just to get the ball rolling and kind of start to understand more about the nuances of the instrument. Build connections in our community. So that means like reaching out to people whose playing you like, talking to folks, being like part of what happens in the Tuba Euphonium world. And I know that for me, like having a lot of personal connections in our community definitely has helped definitely helped me get my first job, and I think it helped me get my second one quite a bit. And so you can't be an island. Like if you show up to an interview and no one knows who you are and no one has any like mutual friends and can't ask about you, it's going to be really tough to break in. And I think the last thing is being open to any and all influences around you in terms of both performing and teaching. So I know that like when I was in college, I went to master classes for all of the instruments. Like when we had a guest artist come in, regardless if it was a vocalist or a string player or a woodwind person, I tried to go because I felt like I learned a lot about teaching just watching people teaching in other areas and on other instruments. And if you have opportunities to attend things like that, please go, because if you're only learning about teaching from other tuba players, you're probably doing yourself a disservice.
Dr. Was?
Yeah, I'm going to steal a little bit from Twyla Tharp and her book, The Creative Habit, which is it's a fantastic book. I actually used it to structure my technique syllabus for a couple years. But 3 of her habits. Number 1 is rituals, and so if you have long-term goals that are highly competitive and very specific, like being a college professor, you need to start today, and you need to start doing the things that college professors do. And sorry, I'm going to say practice, but that's after I already said something else. So practicing, listening, reading are probably your 3 biggest rituals. You need to be doing those every day, right now, today, wherever you are in life. Another thing that she has is what she calls scratching, and that's sort of looking for inspiration or finding inspiration wherever you can. So again, sometimes that comes from the rituals. When you sit down and practice, sometimes you discover something, or sometimes you're just going through recordings on YouTube and you pick up something like, man, that's a style of playing I never even thought about, and you can pursue that. And then the last one of hers is this idea of mastery. She has some different words for it, but really that's mastering your craft. And I think for any career, again, this isn't just being a college professor. If it's the kind of career that you can fall into that's not horribly competitive, you maybe don't have to have these habits. But if you're going to go after something that's this competitive, where a lot of people are going, they have the degrees, they have some of the skill set. But if you're going to make yourself stand out from the crowd, having those habits and engaging in those on a daily basis, again, start today, whether you're in grad school, whether you're in high school.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yeah, 100% agree with everything that's been said so far. I'll go ahead and deduct those 5 points. I did write mine down too. So, in addition to just finding your model, finding a great teacher that you want to emulate and find, and getting that broad experience, go ahead and talk to them about the other aspects of the career as well. Turns out there's a lot more to being a successful college professor than just being able to talk about whole notes and dynamics. You better love emails right off the bat, and most of them might be pointless. So make sure that you are paying attention to the rest of the aspects of the career, to make sure that it is something that you're going to be interested in. The second thing is I wrote down fall in love with paperwork. I will leave that one where it is. I think it's self-explanatory. There's a lot of it. But if you're not the kind of person that's organized with that kind of stuff, or if it's something that's just absolute tedium, you're going to be in for a bad time, because that's a big part of this kind of career. This is an academic career. As much as music is a people profession, academia is academia. So be ready for a lot of paperwork, a lot of book work. Then the third thing I wrote down was give yourself depth in the field. So in very much the same way as going to these other master classes, making sure that, if you're a euphonium player out there who doesn't listen to classical symphonies, because, why should you? you got to listen to more than the planets, man. You got to get out there and make sure that you're listening to the greats. Give yourself depth in music. Make sure that this is something that you are steeped in, something that you are in love with. Because at the end of the day, all that email, all that paperwork, if you're in love with the music behind it, that's something that's going to keep you in the profession, so you don't feel like you've wasted your time getting all those degrees and stuff like that. So.
I just want to say that you and Dr. Clarkson are both going to get 5 points for honesty for saying that you wrote it down. I've been rewatching the Harry Potter movies with my fiance. She loves them, and I make fun of her when I always joke as if she's never seen them and she hates it. But I always seem like they just take away points for no reason and then give them back in the same way. I find that to be hilarious. So please do not feel like I am being unjust in this. We're all having a great time, I hope. Dr. Benavidez, please save us from my rambling.
Yeah, so, I have a lot of very specific things that I share with my students that are interested in pursuing the academic path. But, to give you generalized ideas, I think that starting to teach applied lessons now, at whatever level you find yourself, at whatever level students that may be interested or that you have access to, starting the craft now, because when I was in school, I learned from both in school and out of school, I learned a lot of different ways about how to teach. And when I had my first job, I realized that a lot of that didn't hold water for those particular students at that particular time. And so what I learned was that I did a lot of things wrong as an early teacher. And the students and I all knew that we're in this thing together and we're all going to figure it out together. And it did get better, but I think that doing the actual teaching there's no replacement for that experience. So in whatever fashion, get started now. I think getting lessons with teachers of varied pedagogies and observing as many lessons as you can with others, as has already been said by others, I think that's incredibly important. I think we all start out as somewhat carbon copies of the things that have worked for us, that teachers have told us, and perhaps some of the things that we've heard in studio classes or that we've heard have worked for other colleagues. And that's fine. That's a perfectly great place to start. I always think that there's more that we should be able to offer as teachers, that we should individualize concepts and hopefully grow a little bit with concepts so that we learn how to say concepts in different ways, how to offer varying pedagogy, and how to tailor it to what the student might need. But that doesn't happen until you have access to the lessons. So getting lessons with many teachers and observing lessons with others. I think it's really crucial nowadays, especially, to be fundamentally sound on both tuba and euphonium. I think that you don't have to play the most advanced concerto in your repertoire on your secondary instrument, but I do think that you need to understand how that instrument functions. You need to be able to display a characteristic sound on that instrument, and that's something that sometimes doesn't come to the front of mind. And then something else, when I'm trying to be really real with students, I know this is a fourth point I've gone over. Maybe you'll give me an extra 5 points for this. But I try to tell students that on the front end, if you're looking at this path, you have to be willing to live anywhere, and you have to be willing to make very little money, at least initially, because I think maybe the days were never the situation where you finish school and you'd have an incredible job waiting for you, but they certainly aren't here now. And I think for most people, to find themselves into a situation where their happiness is sustainable and what they feel their productivity is sustainable is not always right out of the gate after finishing schooling. And knowing that and being willing to make those sacrifices on the front end is what I think is almost universal in our field nowadays.
Great. So I think something we've been kind of hinting at is just the idea of the interview, right? Of the actual process itself of how to get the job. And so I'm wondering if you can each talk about how you consider, the best approach for yourself or for anybody else leading up to the preparation for the interview. So, like, do you do mock interviews? Do you record yourself? Do you believe in, preparing everything down to like a script almost versus, being more spontaneous with it? And, I guess what it all comes down to is that I guess, we may be great teachers, right? But we have to be able to sell the product at the interview itself. So what are some ways you strike a good balance between showing enough of your personality, you know, what you have to offer, but also figuring out where are those boundaries, right? So you're not rambling, but you're also not freezing up, right? You're just saying enough to where you're showing enough for the job itself. So let's start with Dr. Clarkson this time.
Okay, so if you are someone who's interested in college teaching and you don't already have Karen Kelsky's The Professor is In, then that's a really, really excellent manual for preparing for the job market. It's geared toward liberal arts and I believe she's a sociologist. But I read that very thoroughly as I was getting ready for interviews, and that helped a lot in terms of um, the kinds of things that I needed to prepare for that I would not have thought to prepare for. I do a lot of research on the school and the studio and the city and the opportunities in the city and the student demographics. And I mean, I am incredibly thorough in that process because I want to have a really, really good understanding of the school and the culture and the situation so that when I go to that interview, I can speak knowledgeably about what they already have going on and also ask informed questions about where they see themselves going. So I think that's a huge part of the interview process is, well, one, presenting yourself, but also actually asking really structured questions for the interviewees that either allow themselves to brag about themselves or give them a chance to see that you are ready to invest in them as a place, as a school. So, you know, asking questions about, well, what are your recruiting goals for 5 and 10 years down the line? And they're like, oh crap, this person wants to recruit for 10 years, and like just that kind of stuff. Now, if any administrators are watching this, I promise that's a totally genuine question from my heart. But I do prep a lot of questions, and I usually have like a little notebook where I've written down all the things that I want to ask about, all the things I want clarity on. So that's a big part of it is the prep, the research ahead of time. I think another big part of it for me is making sure that I am fully myself at that interview. Now, granted, if you're a crappy person, maybe don't be yourself, but I think I'm great. So, like, I really try to be myself in that moment because I want them to not regret hiring me. You know, you don't want to pretend to be a different person in the interview and then you show up and they're like, that is not what you sold us on. Right. So I try to make sure that I don't feel like I have to like hide behind I don't know, lots of different things. Maybe especially as a woman, there's this feeling of like I have to appear more masculine or more like mature or older than I am, and I think I did try to do that for a while, and what I realized is that's just not true to myself. And so I dress professionally, right? I still show up wearing like professional clothes, but I don't try and present myself as anything other than exactly what I am. And honestly, I think I'm great. And if a school doesn't want that, that's their loss. But the places who have wanted that, I think, have really benefited.
Great answer. Okay, let's go, Dr. Wanas.
Yeah, I think biggest key is exactly what Jenny was just saying. You got to be yourself, and I've had a couple interviews in the last 10 years, but my interview here was 20 years ago, and so I'm not a super successful interviewer, right? I've had 3 interviews in my life, and only one of them ended in a job. But I serve on a lot of search committees, so I see it from the other side, and you can tell when somebody is either over researched and it feels kind of creepy, right? I'm seeing some nods from people who've been on search committees, and like the guy comes up to you his first day on campus. He's like, "Oh yeah, I saw that you went to Michigan. I went to Michigan. I had this friend who's probably in the studio with you," and you're just kind of like, "Dude, chill out." Right? That can go way too far. But the kind of research that Jenny was talking about, I think, is really important. That know as much as you can about the school and about the studio. What kind of shape is the studio in right now? Is it small? Is it really large? And maybe they want to have it focused down a little bit more. Is it, what's the situation been with teachers? Has there been a teacher there for a long time? Has there been kind of a revolving door going on? So things like that are really important to know, I think, going into the interview. And then also go back and review your own materials. If you've gotten that far, that means the materials you put together are good. And again, I serve on a lot of search committees, and I see a lot of bad materials. People who obviously haven't read the job description is just to me, that one's a no-brainer. The fact that you read a cover letter that doesn't even address any of the points in the job description. So if you've made it this far, that means that they liked your materials. Your CV is good, your cover letter is good. So go back and review, what did you tell them about why you want the job? And so then when that, that's going to be the first question. Why do you want this job? You can go back to your cover letter and you can start out really confidently because they liked what you had to say. And maybe you can just fill that out a little bit more when you're meeting with them face to face. And then biggest thing, and again, Jenny hit on this a little bit, what's your plan? I think a lot of people are so focused on getting the job that they're not thinking beyond that. If it's a tenure track job, be prepared to talk about how you're going to get tenure. What are you going to do in those first 6 years to build the studio, to get yourself out there, build your own reputation as a performer? And, more and more institutions are saying, look, we want to hire faculty members and keep them for their entire career. So maybe you don't think about this as your lifetime destination, but the reality of it is, if you get, especially a tenure track job, you're probably going to be there your whole career. And you need to be prepared for that. So what are you going to do with those 30 or 40 years where you're teaching at that school? And if you come into a job interview with that kind of vision, you're really going to stick out and be very impressive.
Awesome. Dr. Dickinson.
I mean, I'm going to plow right in here and imitate exactly what's just been said a couple of times. But I mean, first off, yes, you need to be yourself. Hiring does not equal tenure. And you're hopefully going to be working with these folks for a good long time, especially if it is a tenured position. So if you walk in and you are someone pretending to be someone who you are not, you're in for a really bad time, and they're probably not going to want to keep you around anyway. Nobody benefits from that. You don't, the students don't, the other faculty don't. A lot of times you do have to walk in and teach a master class of some kind. They want to watch you teach. They want to make sure you've got chops. I've heard a couple of different philosophies on this, and ultimately you got to go in and do what you got to do. But it's maybe not a bad idea if you're working with 3 students not to only talk about the same thing with all 3 students, unless it's overwhelmingly, glaringly bad. Maybe you just mention it with the second student and say, we've already talked about that. Do you feel comfortable with it? Great. Here's this other thing that we're going to work on now. And then with the third student, well, wow, they're really consistent. Great. You understand these things. Let's work on another thing. That shows them that not only do you have versatility, you've got depth, you've got a broad array of tools at your disposal, and you've got good ears. You can hear what's going on, and you know how to address multiple things. They'll usually ask you to play a little bit. So if you're putting in your materials for a job, you should pretend in your head that you already have gotten asked for that interview. Make sure that you've got at least a half recital ready, something that's clean, something that you like. New music's great, especially if it shows that you're engaged. You're not just playing something that maybe they've had undergrads just play, something like that. So it doesn't have to be the hardest concerto in the rep, but make sure that you're using your playing to demonstrate yourself musically, to complement what you're hopefully doing with your teaching chops. And then the last thing I've marked down, I'll take off another 5 points. Making sure that you know the school that you're going to is a huge, huge thing. Very specifically, if you walk into your first interview and you're outlining your dreams and aspirations, I want 30 in the studio, we're going to need about this many of that, and you're interviewing for a small liberal arts school in the middle of nowhere, maybe that's not the right goal for them either. They're not going to be very impressed with you. You mentioned I've had 2 interviews, and so far they've both worked. They're 2 for 2. I'm doing great. But in the first one, I was meeting with the director of the School of Music here at Kennesaw at the time, Dr. Stephen Plate. He's now at Central Arkansas with Gail Robertson, and I'm supremely jealous. They're both fantastic people, so love that. But Dr. Plate, I did not know he was a tuba player, and he stands at about 6'7". And his hand is about the size of like 2 of mine, so it's super intimidating right out of the gate. And he starts asking me these very intelligent questions about my goals for the studio. Well, what tubas do you think are appropriate for this or that? Do we need to buy? Blah, blah. And of course, I didn't know he's a tuba player, and thank goodness I actually knew what I was talking about, because he was testing me, making sure that my goals aligned with what Kennesaw State was after. And I knew the school. I knew its basic history and trajectory and kind of some of the other professors and what they were about. And it lined up with a lot of what I already wanted for myself and for a studio that I would be a part of. So make sure that you've got your goals in place. Make sure that you understand the goals of the school and the atmosphere of the school that you're going into, so that you know that it is a good fit, and then everybody's going to be a lot more comfortable. So.
Awesome. Dr. Goodman.
Sure. I figured I'd give my kind of what's worked for me as far as interview preparation. I found the first interview I took was for an adjunct job, and that worked out. But then I took a couple of interviews that I felt went very badly. And I think it was because I started trying to like divine what the committee wanted to hear, and I was trying to like answer questions correctly in some way. And so I found that I was definitely the one who was really over preparing, and I just sounded robotic, and I sounded a little bit kind of. I can be mumbly anyway, but mumbly and also trying to remember what I was trying to say is really not a good look for me. So I had to kind of come up with a different way of preparing for the interview. And there were a couple things that really helped. The first one was just knowing what having an idea of what the structure of not just the interview day, but also just like the first Zoom interview. Almost always they ask you something like, why do you want the job? And you're not allowed to say, because I don't have any jobs and I want this one. So kind of, before my first interview, I had never really thought about that kind of stuff. And then I was talking with a friend, and he was like, okay, so why do you want to work at Southeastern Louisiana University? And I was like, and just had nothing to say. So a thing that I've really started to rely on are practice interviews. So at first it was with friends or with people that had taken some of these interviews before. I had some colleagues offer last time I was taking a lot of interviews to do some mock interviews with me. And it's just great to kind of get in that mindset where you're hearing a question you haven't thought about before. It might be a great question. It might be something that you feel is, I've gotten the what are your biggest weaknesses question before and stuff like that. And like, there are just times where you have to talk about something. In the last interview I took, they asked me, since COVID, what do you think the future of classical music is going to be, and how can we prepare our students for that? I don't know. Play the tuba. But I was able to kind of pick up on one thing. So I talked about, we're all needing to record ourselves a lot more, and that includes both audio and video. So I talked about how I work with my students with making sure that they look and sound great, because obviously that's something we're doing as performers now. And it's not so much about just exactly nailing the perfect answer for a question, but being able to kind of speak intelligently about things and coming off as someone that is thoughtful and able to articulate themselves. Hopefully here. The other thing, kind of to that end, is, as people have talked about before, sometimes people are in these jobs for 20 or 40 years. So people are really looking for a colleague, and that both means someone who's going to be great at what they do and make sure that the tuba and euphonium players are sounding awesome, or whatever you're interviewing for. But it also means like someone that won't be a jerk, and someone that won't be difficult to get along with, someone that won't talk down to people. So like being yourself helps, and also make it clear that you don't want to come off as someone that is so either wrapped up in what they're doing, or so hard-headed, or so extreme that if anyone ever disagrees with you, there's going to be a big problem. And having sat on a couple of search committees, there are definitely some people it's like, it seems like if we're not going to do his thing, we're not going to be able to do anything. And so you want to make sure that you're someone that people can stand to work with.
Wonderful. Okay, and last but not least, Dr. Benavidez.
Yeah, so something that I talk with my students about in interview preparation is that it's not really all that dissimilar from preparing for a recital or an audition. There are certain things that you can control, there are certain things that you can't. And you don't want to be, as if it was a pendulum, you wouldn't want it to swing too far one way or too far the other. What I mean is, you don't want to be so micromanaging and introspective about what you want to say that you're not actually having a conversation. And similarly, you don't want to care so much about what the other person is hearing that you're saying things that you don't actually believe or feel. So there's sort of this space that can encompass both of those goals, I think. And in preparing for that, I think that one of the things that I did early in my career was have conversations with my mentors about how do interviews go, what are some of the questions that are typically asked. And I had a little black book, and I started to write out all my answers exactly verbatim, word for word, and overplan it. And my very first interview, it came off very inauthentic. I believe the question was, what is your teaching philosophy? And I just blanked, and I think I said, I don't know, do no harm? I don't know. So I hadn't actually thought about what that concept of a teaching philosophy meant for me, meant for my students, and how I would use it. I was just trying to write out what other people wanted to hear. And it was a really hard lesson for me. But I realized, well, what I actually want to do is I want to believe what I'm going to share, the concepts that I'm going to share, but I want to do it in a conversational way. And, oftentimes some of these interviews spill into the lunch, spill into the dinner. And even though everyone's at ease, you're still somewhat in the spotlight in those situations. So, one of the things we do here at FSU, we have 6 to 8 grad students, and we have a weekly seminar. And we go through these questions, and you can call them mock auditions or mock interviews, I should say, or you can call them conversations. But there is a specific material that will be covered in an interview. Recruiting will always be asked. Teaching philosophy is likely to be asked. A lot of people don't even really know what goes into a really great curriculum vitae or a great letter of application, and that's part of the process. So, as a bit of advice for our viewers, I would say have conversations with the people that are in the places that you'd like to be, and talk about these subjects, and not in a way that you're just trying to soak it up so that you can repeat it, but in a way that you can come to understand your own identity in these various facets, and that you can have conversations with people. We've already talked about it, but I would just like to emphasize authenticity is just so key, because even if you had a great idea of what that school might want, and you went in there and you just played the part of your life, not only do you need to worry about being tenured a few years down the road, so you've got to look at the long game, but you're not being authentic to yourself or to your students if you try to be someone that you're not. And there's no, in my opinion, there's no employment that's worth being inauthentic to yourself, nor is that, I think, an achievable goal anyway. I have students that are sometimes introverts, some that are extroverts. Don't try to be the other. Just be yourself. And if it's not a good fit, then it's not a good fit. You want to find a place for you that is a good fit for you and who you are. So I think that's difficult when the opportunities are so slim, but I do think that's the best way to go about it.
I'm going to jump in. One more thing. I'm going to play my old guy card here and get to speak twice. You've heard all of us talk about seeing it from the other side. And so if you're in an institution, and more of them are doing this, where they allow students on a search committee, quite often there will be at least one student on a search committee. If you're a graduate student, do everything you can do to get on the search committee. If you're an adjunct teacher, they're not going to require you to be on search committees in your area. They may not let you. It may be an institutional thing, but ask. Go to the director of the school. If you're thinking about if you really want to have that full-time tenure track job or full-time professor of practice, whatever it is, you have to see it from the other side. Look at the way people put their materials together. Once you've served on a search committee, your approach to applying for and interviewing for jobs really changes, because you get to see 50, 60, 70 examples of how to do it right, how to do it wrong, and how to do it everywhere in between. So get that experience any way you can.
Well said. I want to share another silly story that has to do with paperwork. This isn't a professional paperwork thing. This is when I was in high school. Obviously, CVs, cover letters are incredibly important in academia. But when you kind of first started, it's probably when you're a young student, you're sending resumes out to high schools or stuff like that to start getting work. I found out very quick that the way I was taught to write my resume in high school was not super great for music, and this is how I was taught that at the top you should write some positive things about yourself, like some maybe Twitter handle stuff, inspirational, charismatic. I went to my first college audition when I was in high school at Northwestern University, where I would later attend for my master's. And Rex Martin, I had to hand him my resume. This was back in the day where you print stuff out. Professor Rex Martin got my resume. He looked at it and he went, "Well, Matthew, it seems you are charismatic and energetic. Good for you." And I was just sitting there, I was in a full suit. I was getting ready to play pantomime, and my whole life flashed before my eyes. So have that experience earlier rather than later, I suppose. My dinner wasn't on the line at that audition, but later on in life, sometimes it can be. I want to transition after that story to talking a little bit more about the job in general, and maybe throwing it back to some more personal experiences. They don't have to be as awkwardly silly as mine seem to be all of the time. Gosh. But We have another audience question, and I'd like to just start with that. What's something you wish you would have heard in your first year of teaching?
I'll jump in. Okay. I really wish someone had told me that I was not going to be good at this to start. Like, I really wish someone had just been like, you're going to kind of suck at this for a little while, but everyone does, because we do such a horrible job on Instagram and Facebook and all these places being like, look at this CD I recorded, look at this recital I did, and it's all about how amazing and perfect everyone is, but everyone is bad at this at first. And we do such a bad job making it safe for people to express how hard it is and how much we need support. And depending on the school, you might not have a mentor or someone who's like looking out for you. So I really, really wish someone had like just let me know it was okay to feel like I was really bad at something, and to just like know that it gets easier. But it really, really helps to have like a mentor in your corner who you can talk to. So I know I have some that I really lean on a lot, and yeah, I hope that the next generation of folks coming into this field will come to me and say like, I feel like I suck at this, and I'll be like, I did too. Sometimes I still do. And like just making it way, way less of this egocentric like college teacher flawless perfection thing all the time, and just again recognizing that we are human and it's a skill that you have to learn, and the only way to learn it is to do it. So yeah, it's okay to not be great at it right away.
Dr. Dickinson?
I mean, that resonated very deeply with me. I mean, I was perfect immediately, obviously. And if any of my old students are watching, I sincerely apologize. No, I mean, yeah, you're not going to be great at this right out of the gate. And it's a skill. Trial and error is still a thing here as well, just as with the practice room. As far as finding something else that I wish I'd been more mindful of in my first year, a lot of times we get into the job and we're on fire. Like we want to do everything and we want to do it all immediately, and we want to, we're reaching for the stars. And at some point, you just got to make sure you got yourself a good, solid foundation, and you're providing a good, positive opportunity for the students, and you're achieving growth. Maybe if you don't have, 17,000 different events and everything else, and that's fine. Don't try to do everything. Try to do the things that you are going to do well. So that'd be the thing that I wish I'd been a little more mindful of early on.
Dr. Wass?
Yeah, I'm still waiting to get good at this. So I'm waiting for that day to come. Snap my fingers and be like, hey, I'm really good at this now. No, I think it was easier for me having been through the public school experience, and I team taught in public school. I always had experienced teachers in the classroom with me all the time. And so, it was obvious that was structured for me to grow. And so I think I came into this job expecting that, like, hey, I'm going to grow as this happens. What was hard for me is actually the first year went really, really well. My predecessor had been here for 35 years and had kind of grown distant from the students and distant from the rest of the tuba world. And so when I came in with new ideas, and I was young and I was energetic, and so everything was great. And then year two was the year that sucked, because then all of a sudden there were no more new ideas, and everybody actually had to practice if they were going to get better. And so year two was kind of the year where I was like, man, do I know what I'm doing? But I think the things that I wish I'd understood, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit of what has been said already. Understand the vulnerability gap. That's between you and your students. Learning as an adult, which your students are, is an incredibly vulnerable experience. When we're 6 years old, it's very natural. You don't have to admit to yourself as a 6-year-old, hey, I don't know how to write. And that's really a flaw in me as a human being. So I better go to first grade and learn how to write, right? But when you're 18, 19 years old, and you just thought you were good at something because you got the All-State patch to prove it, and then you show up and, mean old Dr. Benavidez is there saying, man, you just don't make a good sound on the tuba. Or Dr. Clarkson saying, yeah, you think you know your scales, right? And that's, we're asking for a ton of vulnerability for our students. And in order to be able to relate to that, you have to sit in their chair. That means you got to continue to take lessons. You have to continue to push yourself. You have to continue to put yourself in situations where you might fail, because you're requiring that of your students. And if it becomes this sort of all-knowing teacher, all you're going to do is just limit yourself to the things that you know you can be successful at. And then you're coming in and 6 hours a day, you're telling students, oh, no, you cannot stop with the things that you're successful at. You have to continue to push yourself. And you are one giant hypocrite. And it took me about 4 years to realize I was doing that to my students, and that was some of the disconnect we were having. And when I started pushing myself as a teacher, as a player, as a scholar, it really helped my relationship with my students. So I wish I had known that earlier, I think.
Dr. Goodman?
Yeah, sure. Dr. Wass, as someone going into my second year, I'm really excited to hear that. Yeah, I think kind of going back to what Jenny was talking about, like realizing that like when you start doing this, you've had lots of related experiences, but you don't have the experience of being the one person that has to build this program, right? Professor Zirkle said before I started, he said, the first lesson is probably going to be your student will leave and shut the door, and there'll be this sort of shared thought bubble that just says, what was that? But I think for me, the thing my first year that was really a learning experience, I started in a program that was in a very impoverished part of the world and was really kind of working with students who had really variable backgrounds. And there was a lot of kind of chaos, and there were a lot of people that hadn't been through great public school programs, as we know, in terms of money and support and a well-funded art, things like that. And I kind of had this idea coming from sort of the lofty music schools of America that my big job was to like let kids know what the standards were, and I need to like set these high goals. And then some of my students didn't really read music all the way. And some of them were playing on like some came in with just a marching baritone, and you kind of like I think Dr. Ross was the one who said meet them where you are earlier. You learn really quickly that like you can't just say, oh, here's a solo and you need to play it really well without any mistakes next week, because no one will get anything out of that. And so I really had to find kind of my way of meeting them where they are, and kind of my voice as a teacher as well. I kind of surprised myself in that I do a lot better as sort of like a cheerleader, or as someone that's like, that was great, now let's do that next thing, we'll find that next way to improve, rather than someone who's kind of a taskmaster, or someone who's kind of this kind of more old school teacher. And so like finding the way that you can connect with students in the way that you can help them do the next right thing, rather than someone that's just only going to be sort of pushing students. That there's a time for that, but like with a lot of students, that's not going to get you anywhere, and everyone's going to be upset at it.
Dr. Benavidez.
Right. So a couple of things have already been said. Like, not every lesson has to be perfect from your perspective. I can say for sure that I had many lessons that fell far short of perfection with my students, and I think that my students still got something out of that experience that contributed to their growth. I had the advantage, or maybe disadvantage, depending on your perspective, of my first two jobs began as one-year appointments. Where subsequently I had to take an interview for the full-time position. And what I didn't know then that I wish I had, at least to the extent that I know now, is it is okay to ask for help from admin and from other faculty. It felt like to me in those situations like every single thing that I do is being dissected, because eventually I'm going to have to be on the line here for this position that I currently occupy. But I think that actually, in my experience, people are willing to help, and I just felt a little bit too close-minded maybe to pursue that help. And this is something else that I think it was told to me, but I didn't really quite know it until I had to experience it. So I wouldn't say that I knew it going in fully as well as I needed to, but I had a really great mentor in Fritz Kenzig. And one of the things that I remember him telling me when we would talk about how to get this career thing started and how to do good work in the field is that to be that never-ending curiosity, to be a constant learner. I think the way that he said it is, as a teacher, you're a learner, you're just a few steps ahead of the student. And, to speak on what's already been said, that's how a student will follow you rather than having to push them up the hill. And I think that that's really valuable advice.
Yeah, terrific. So now that we are here, in part 3 of this panel. So I want to ask, what's something that each of you hopes to be able to see in the higher education path in the foreseeable future? You know, like what's kind of like a goal of yours that you hope to see within either your lifetime or that you want to advocate for within your position or within just academia in general in the music field. So let's start with Dr. Dickinson this time.
Oh, good. Um, so that's a tough question. Obviously, especially as you spend more time around something, you become more acquainted with things that you see that maybe aren't as good, or things that you see as, oh, I never would have seen that from the outside, and it is good. Very specifically, things that maybe I'd want to see different in higher ed. I mean, you could talk a long time about the adjunct crisis, and I say that not from a selfish position of wanting a more full-time thing, but more from the position of right, but more from the position of the students don't always get served by having less connection with a teacher. Like it's a very difficult thing to maintain that and to cultivate that, and to build that atmosphere when the teacher's ultimately very disconnected. Um, so that would be one huge thing that I would love to see change. In general, I see a trend right now from my very, very limited experience with higher ed, more towards thickening the administrative walls, and thinning out the foundation underneath faculty. And I don't know if that's everywhere, if it's just been some of the schools I've been affiliated with. And I know that none of these are absolutes that we're talking about here per se. Um, but maybe I would love to see a little bit more of a change towards the students themselves, as opposed to let's bump up all our student numbers and get some revenue in here. Revenue is good. Revenue allows us to pay for new programs. That's important. But if everything starts becoming about the perpetuation of just numbers, you start to lose the people element of this. I'm very lucky to work where I work. Rhinehart in particular is outstanding about taking care of his students. They showed it all the way through COVID. Kennesaw's done a great job of finding a lot of their balance most of the time. But every now and then I'll talk with a colleague, and it's just disheartening about some of the priorities that you see here and there and yon. And maybe I'm building castles in the air, but just something that I've, in my very, again, limited experience with this, I wish could be a little different, turning back towards the students.
All right, let's go Dr. Clarkson.
For me, the big thing I would love to see is more women doing what we do. I think there are less than 10 full-time female Euphonium faculty across the country, and there's a reason for that, right? Because we don't support our women students. We don't show them what it looks like to be a woman in this field. I'm sure maybe all of us had noticed in the past year, especially like all of those summer camps that happen and like seminars and stuff. Everyone's like, "Oh crap, we need a woman on the panel," right? And I mean, I love getting called, so like, please don't stop doing that. But at the same time, I'm glad that we're finally starting to realize that there's this huge gap in the like gender equality, among many other things, in our field, right? That's just the one that I'm most tuned into. But yeah, like I was trying to make a list the other day of all the other women who do what I do, and I thought it was larger. Like I just thought it was a longer list, and it's not. So I think one big thing is that doing as much as we can do to make sure that our young women students feel supported and know that they don't have to be one of the dudes or be like a tuba jock or anything like that. And like there's another path, but I don't think we do a great job kind of letting people see what that looks like and showing them that, it's okay to be a woman and to be feminine or not in this field. I think I spent so much of my time in college trying to be one of the guys and then trying to rebel against being one of the guys and then figuring out what that looked like. And even into my master's and doctorate at IU, I think I only ever had one other woman in my studio in all 3 of the schools I attended. So, if you're out there and you are a middle school, high school teacher, get your schools to put more women on these instruments. If you're a college teacher, recruit women, support women, and make sure that they feel like they can succeed in this field. That's probably my big one. I think the other thing for me is I feel like in general, universities do a really horrible job letting folks know the wide variety of careers that exist in music. Because when you study music ed, you think you're going to be a band director, and when you study performance, you think you're going to play in an orchestra. And like, there's a lot of stuff in between, and I hope that academia can start to understand that the training, that we can take a lot of what we learn in those degrees and apply to other things partially, but also recognize that there's a lot of ways to be a musician that it does not follow the traditional path of teaching or performing. And letting students know that it's okay to reevaluate success regularly, and know that they don't have to do one of those two things to be a professional, and to support the music field. So I think those two are my big ones.
Absolutely. Dr. Benavidez.
Yeah, so I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I think I have maybe two ideas, and one, it's totally above my pay grade, and I have no say in it whatsoever. There's nothing I can do about it, but accessibility to affordable education. I know that we all have seen the rise of tuition in the last 15, 20 years, especially. I was thinking about this the other day when I was a senior in high school in Texas. I did pretty well on the SAT, so as I said before, I applied to UNT. It was the only school I applied to. They gave me a Regents Fellowship. It was for $16,000, and that covered all 4 years of tuition. And that was 20 years ago. It doesn't seem like, at least from my perspective, it doesn't seem that long ago. But I see the numbers rising steadily, and I'm sure many have heard about what's been going on at Juilliard, specifically in the last few days, and their student representatives. So I think that's just something that I'm really curious to see what's going to happen in the next 10 years regarding accessibility to affordable education. To kind of extend on what Dr. Clarkson was saying, I would love to see more diversity of faculty and of students in our programs. We all know that we're better when we afford people of different values, ideas, and backgrounds an opportunity at the decision-making table. And I believe that that's something that can be cultivated at the studio level. For me personally, I'm in the beginning stages of developing a future faculty workshop aimed at underrepresented minorities that may happen here by next summer. And that's something that I feel like this is what I can contribute to that cause. So, that's kind of one of my passion ideas, but diversity of faculty and students so that we fix the pipeline to reach the people that are in positions to get these faculty positions.
Yeah, these are all such inspiring answers. They're great. Dr. Goodman?
Yeah, just to build on that point, I think it's easy to kind of forget, especially as those of us that kind of are starting to be in the camp of a career is working out, that like a career, like getting a degree in music is a little bit of a gamble. And I think that if you are from a really comfortable sort of background in terms of especially economic, but if you are in sort of the majority in any kind of way, that makes it easier for you to take gambles on that. And so for people that don't come with that background, there needs to be more and more support to make sure that it's not a totally unequal. Because I think there's a lot of stuff that may be totally unintentional that just slams the door shut for a lot of different students. And I think we're worse off for that. The other related thing, I think, and I sort of yelled about not knowing the answer to this earlier, but I hope that music schools find a way to continue to be relevant for the type of music that people are interested in. A thing I worry about is that music schools are sort of, you do band in high school and you like band, so then you're like, well, I'll major in music, and then you get to music school and you learn what music school music is. You learn, okay, so if I want to do this seriously, I have to be Jenny said, like, I have to be an orchestral player, a band director. And we kind of like get in this one kind of circular thing where then you start teaching students, you teach them to become band directors that send your students back to music school. And so we have this kind of what can start to feel like a closed loop. And I think that schools that are bringing in more different types of music making, the schools that are bringing in majors in electronic music, or in like, some schools have like singer-songwriter, things like that. But that sort of opened things up to a different stream than just I took lessons in high school. This kind of very kind of recursive thing that we had going on, while still respecting, I think that our participatory music culture in America of school band, school orchestra, school choir is incredibly important. And I think sustaining that and supporting that is great. But then maybe also starting to fold in types of music that are not traditionally in the academy.
Yeah, great. And finally, Dr. Wass.
Yeah, I'll go big picture on this. I just finished serving on a provost search committee, and I'm on a dean search committee now, and I've done a lot of accreditation work. Uh, Everyone else is describing the symptoms, but let's look at the big problem. It's public trust in higher education is at an all-time low, and it's for all the reasons that you were hearing about. It's the costs, it's the lack of diversity, and it's the very narrowness of the curriculum and the ways that we're defining success. If we define success as, we're only a good music school if our students are going out and winning orchestra jobs, or if our students are getting into Juilliard, et cetera, top schools. If that's how you're defining success, you're not going to have a diverse faculty, you're not going to have a diverse student body, because very few people are on that track by age 17 other than wealthy white people and Asians. I mean, that's pretty much that's where most of that's coming from. If you're going to open this up, like truly open this up, we're going to have to open up the curriculum. And so I think Charlie had a great point there. We have to look at what are we doing systemically that's excluding people? And then also, what are we doing systemically that's causing us to be disconnected? And so sometimes that's the styles of music that we've excluded from study. Or, maybe not excluded, but we haven't worked to include. And I think it's way easier for us as tuba and euphonium players because we don't have the tradition. I play in a trio with one of our violin faculty, and our approaches to teaching are so different. She feels so locked in, like I have to teach this repertoire this way, and all my students have to have had these experiences before they get here. And if I tried to teach like that, I'd have 0 students, right? And so I think, if anybody who attended the VTech, you saw that. I think tuba and euphonium players right now are like super creative. We handled the pandemic, I think, better than a lot of other people did. So we're going to have to be the people who are going to help lead this, because a lot of our string colleagues and voice colleagues and piano colleagues they don't have the experience to be able to think, like, what would it look like if I wasn't just trying to get people into Juilliard for a master's degree? They're not necessarily like opposed to it, but I think we have to be really open to that. And then we also have to look at, what can we do to try to make this more affordable for people? And at the same time, not put it all by just abusing faculty. Okay, everybody's just going to teach twice as much, or we're taking away tenure from everybody, or everybody's going to be a professor of practice and you're going to teach twice as many students because there's no longer any research load. But these are conversations that I think, especially those of us who've been around for a while, we have to be involved in these conversations. But I think everybody coming in, we need fresh ideas. There's a lot of us who've been around for a while that don't have the ideas that brand new people might. But yeah, I think if we're going to restore public trust across the board, this is not a political thing anymore. It was, but it's not anymore. There are people on all areas of the political spectrum that really don't trust higher education and don't believe that it's overly beneficial, and particularly not in the arts. And so I think it's up to us to prove to them that it is, and that it can be, and that we can change.
Well said. We have one last question for today. I know I'm going to continue to be effusive and thankful for the large amount of time that you five have set aside for today, and I certainly am inspired by everything that has been done and said today. But one last question, a little bit less of a big thinker. What are you doing to get better at being a professor? What have you been doing lately to make sure that you continue to be the best version of yourself? Dr. Clarkson.
Okay, so I talk to my mentors often, which Kevin Wass and Kevin Stees, the Kevins. I talk to my mentors a lot and ask them for advice a lot and bounce ideas off them a lot. And every time I talk to Kevin Wass on the phone, I end up with a 3-page legal pad of notes of things that I'm like, oh, I want to try this and try this. He recommended this book. So yeah, just asking people who you really respect and value what they do, and asking them what they're doing. I also am perpetually finding books that I that I just feel like really enhance what I do. And probably for me, the most recent reads that have been really helpful were Brene Brown's Dare to Lead, which is just amazing and totally, honestly, fully changed how I approach being a teacher. And so if you haven't read it, I fully recommend it. Just make sure you also have like a box of tissues ready to go for that process. And I also recently read a book called The Culture Code. I think it's by Dan Coyle. I should double check that. Can someone check that while I'm talking? But Culture Code is all about like groups and like building healthier groups and supporting like good culture and all of these different things you can do. And it's actually really, really practical. Like it's not just theoretical. They give you these very specific actions or how you set up chairs in a space, like all these things that you can do that make a culture more successful. And I have already seen in my own studio here some really, really positive things coming from those actions. And so yeah, a lot of it is, again, just talking to people who I respect and who do their jobs really well and who I want to be more like, and reading things that make me better at what I do, and also like putting in the work. Like I warm up. The things I ask my students to do in their fundamental routine, I do that in my fundamental routine, so that when they walk by my office, they're like, oh, okay, she really does do that. But like, yeah, just walking the walk, I think, is a big part of that for me, and not ever thinking that I'm above what I ask my students to do.
Dr. Benavidez.
Yeah, so I think generally doing a lot more reading and doing a lot more listening in areas that I have probably not been as curious in before. I specifically in these times, reading books about productivity and organization. I think one of the things that Dr. Clarkson just touched on is continuing to practice and to embody all of the principles that we tell our students. One of the ways that I've really tried to follow that as of late is to pick up the texts, the method materials, the solos that maybe did not appeal to me at a particular time in my education, and try to still set aside time each day to be a student. I can't say that I ever got to the third Roche book when I was in school, and I'm pulling the book out and I'm sight reading and I'm working them up, and it's important to me because as much as we try to be the all-knowing teacher for our students, to go back to something that I said previously, if we can remove the hubris of that and to feel that we are just a learner that's a few steps ahead of the student, then this is a way to stay those couple of steps ahead. And I found that it really does enliven my teaching when I have more materials to suggest, or maybe even better developed techniques to represent because of this sort of work. So, you said not to answer practice for a previous question, so I'm going to say practice for this one.
I'll give you that. Dr. Wass.
Yeah, all of that. And that was Dan Coyle. I don't have it here; it's at home, but I looked it up on Amazon. Dan Coyle's Culture Code. That's a great book. The other one for studio culture specifically is Whiff Rudd's book, Side by Side, is absolutely fabulous. Yeah, I figured I'd get some thumbs up on that one. It's great and I love just the title of it, that idea that it's not teacher student, but the two of you are side by side. At the same time, your job is to be there for them and to lead them. It's not this, especially with your freshmen, they need you to tell them what to do. That was a hard realization for me too. I wanted to be like this cool teacher who is friendly with everybody, and we're all on this journey together. And no, sometimes you just gotta say, look, you need to do this right now, and they need that from you. And so I think continuing to grow in that way. The thing that I've had to learn, and I've had to learn it the hard way, because man, I hit a wall hard, and self-care is so important. So for me, it meant like getting in, and actually my students really inspired me to start talking about my mental health and to get some help with my mental health. Finding something that's really important to you, that you're really into, that isn't your job. I don't have kids, so that's hard for me. I think with people who have kids, it's a little bit built in. You've got that, like, my friends who have kids tell me they get home, they walk in the door, they turn off school because they have to. Their kids need them. My wife and I work in this building, and we don't have kids, and so when things are going bad, it doesn't stay here. It comes home with us. And so, for me, my running has been really important, and getting off to the mountains has been really important. And I have to do that because if I don't take care of myself, I'm worthless to the students. I'm worthless to my colleagues. My colleagues are relying on me to lead. I've been here a long time. I'm a full professor. People rely on me for certain things. I have responsibilities, and I can't fulfill those if I don't take care of myself. So that's probably been the hardest lesson for me to learn, and it's something that I'm still really working on.
Dr. Goodman?
Oh boy. Sorry, it is 2021 and I'm muted. Yeah, I really identify with a lot of these things. I think what Jenny was talking about asking people about stuff, the last couple of years I've just started trying to get curious about what other people are doing and kind of bother them with shop talk things. So I've got some piano colleagues that I was asking them about what kind of stuff they do with their kids, and I found that just hearing what other people are doing, what kind of approaches they're taking, really kind of gets me fired up about what I'm doing. And the other thing, I think this is probably not I'm not the only one with this experience in the pandemic, but when everything kind of shut down last year, there's this kind of moment of okay, what am I doing? Why am I doing all this stuff? And it's really kind of made me realize how much I need to take care of the sort of fan part of music, the part of me that wants to do music stuff, because music itself, by itself, apart from culture, apart from how important it is to people's lives, but music itself is really cool, and I care a lot about it. And so I have a thing with my friends from my quartet called Book Club, where we've been someone submits an album for the week, and we all just kind of walk around listening to it and talk about it. But just in general, just trying to get excited about what I'm doing, because and try to kind of help my students find that too. Just because it can get really easy. I've definitely gone through periods, and I've talked to other people who've gone through periods where you don't really listen to music, and it's what a lame thing to go into this sort of not lucrative, not sort of glorified career, and then kind of fall out of love with it. And I think that that's something that like a relationship with a person, a relationship with music takes some work, and just taking care of that part that really cares about that.
Dr. Dickinson, close us out.
That's a tough act to follow, guys. Yeah. I mean, again, I strongly resonate with everything that's been said so far about this. When I first started teaching, 2017 it would have been, I was still adjunct, and we were building studios. There wasn't, so I was working at several local high schools and teaching private lessons, and also a couple middle schools. I was putting well past 1,000 miles, sometimes 2,000 miles on my car each month, driving all over the greater metro area of Atlanta. I was running myself completely ragged. It's not a good place to be, quite frankly. So one of the best things I did for myself to start improving as a professor was to make sure that I got to a point where I could prioritize the university stuff. I didn't have to say yes to absolutely everything that came through the door. Started picking and choosing. A student, and maybe he's watching, I don't know, made a comment to me a couple of years ago. He's like, yeah, we can always tell when you've been teaching late the night before. Coming in for 7 a.m. warm-ups, and I've still got the bags under my eyes 24/7, and and just a little bit zonked. So it's self-care 100%, and making sure that you take care of where you are and where you stay mentally, and that, going back to Maslow again, I guess, will also start to affect your own ability to engage in music. I did not listen to music at that point. I was driving in the car constantly in complete and utter silence, and my wife doesn't understand how I do that. But when you've been around music from 7 a.m. to 8 or 9 p.m., nope. I will drive for an hour to an hour and a half in the car to get back home in dead silence, and it is the most peaceful, relaxing thing I could imagine. And so starting to divest myself of some of that extra responsibility and consolidate my focus and focus in my efforts has allowed me to start to fall a little bit in love with music again. And that was that's something that I'm going to still continuing to try to improve. It gave me a little bit more time to practice, which I'm very thankful for. I've dealt with some nerve stuff off and on, so having time to actually sit down and like take care of myself as a player always puts me in a better mood in lessons and lets me play for my students better. Um, so yeah, staying a couple of steps ahead of the learner. By the way, I love that. Stealing that's going to show up. That's but yeah, so taking care of yourself, making sure that you stay in love with music, and making sure that you're in a place where you can show that to your students is always going to be something that I'm striving for myself personally to become a better professor. And the other thing that is my absolute favorite that I marked down here, having guest artists in is just my favorite time, because I get to sit back and I'm sitting back at the back of the room just burning through or like making notes of what they're saying, because it seems like in a lot of ways a lot of the best teachers are always saying the same things in different ways, and ultimately we're all kind of pointing at the exact same target but from different perspectives, and the more perspectives I can take in for myself, the more that I can then turn around and offer to a student that maybe doesn't understand perspective 1, 2, 3, or even 4, but I got perspective 5. Let's give that one a try. And sometimes that's the one, and you never know. Maybe it's not even a different perspective. Maybe it's the exact same perspective said in the exact same words, and the student goes, "Wow, I wish I had known that." And you have to sit in the back of the room grinding your teeth a little bit. Yeah. Um, but becoming a better professor is remembering that you are not an island. Water will always find its level, and iron sharpens iron. So making sure that you're surrounding yourself with the place that you want to be, and continuing to fall in love with music and seeing other people engaging in that is a great way to do it. So.
Well said. Holy cow! It's been 2 hours. You all are incredible. I am inspired, and I just want to thank you again. It will not stop today. I will probably continue sending you thank you emails for the next few weeks. So stop checking your email if you want to stop hearing from me. I hope everyone in Instagram land is giving these 5 a hearty round of applause from wherever you are. Let's remember that this is all in benefit, hopefully, to Education Through Music, the organization that we've mentioned throughout today. We'll be at the Tuba and Euphonium Charity Series. We'll be continuing to plug this incredible organization throughout the month of June. So if you find yourself particularly inspired and you want to donate to help others participate in this incredible thing we call music, you can head to, we're all on Instagram, I suppose, right now, so if you're watching it. So head to the link in our bio. It'll send you right there, and you can give money for music. And that's exactly what we want. Thank you again for what's soon to be the billionth time to our panelists. My name is Matt Cundler. Juan Enrique Alonso is right next to me. It has been an incredible 2 hours, so we hope to see you all real soon. Bye-bye. Woo! We're off.